Good afternoon, everyone. This is the webinar scheduled for the afternoon of 18 April. The subject we'll be covering today is advanced reporting in Marin Search Marketer. This will include alerts, different reporting formats such as PDFs and web queries, the use of dimensions, both for reporting as well as other integration cases, and the ability to measure lift due to changes and optimizations made within your account. Due to some minor technical difficulties earlier, this is a re-recording of the same webinar. As such, the questions and other interactions with the audience will be somewhat abbreviated at the end. To start off with, we will be covering alerts. Alerts in Marin parlance are recurring reports that are designed to show you items of interest within your account. They are designed to help save time by pointing out specifically those areas of your account that require immediate attention or are otherwise potentially problematic. Generally, alerts are set up with relatively restrictive filters so that you will only ever receive the alert in your inbox when something serious enough has happened within the account to trigger them. The benefit of them being recurring reports generated by Marin is that they will run very early in the morning with the goal of being available to you by the time you arrive in the office. They are generally designed to be loaded within an hour or two after cost and revenue data has fully processed within our system. In general, there are two types of alerts in Marin. They are performance and status or QA alerts. Performance alerts are designed to show you substantial fluctuations in incoming traffic or revenue data. This may be due to factors outside of your control, but it will still indicate areas where you should take a look and make sure that everything is functioning as expected. For example, budgeting problems where either payment was denied or something unusual has happened in that account has led to a decrease in spend and traffic day over day. Alternatively, tracking failures within the system, whether it be third-party providers or the upload into Marin. If that were to occur, what you would see day over day is a decrease in conversion volume of potentially 90, 100%. And as a function of that, obviously, you would like to be made aware, and it provides you the opportunity via alert to navigate into the account directly and immediately tackle any high priority items that exist. As an example of a tracking failure type alert, what you could do is navigate to the Campaigns tab. And then what we will use is the % change in revenue column. For most alerts where you're looking at fluctuations, we will be relying on the % change columns. These can be found under most of the categories in Marin's View Builder and consist of the rightmost column with the delta triangle and the % sign next to it. In this scenario, we'll be taking a look at the revenue % change column, which is under the conversions and revenue subsection. And as you can see, I've checked it off here. In addition, due to the use of % change columns, we will want to make use of the change versus section as well. In this case, we will be selecting prior day because we are looking for day over day changes, not week over week trends. And as soon as we do that, we can filter on revenue change as being less than negative 90%. And as you can see here, that has led to 4 campaigns that, for one reason or another, went from having some amount of revenue on Tuesday the 16th to having little to no revenue on Wednesday the 17th. These would be the items that would be of potential concern. Please note that in some cases this may be intentional. Maybe you pause these campaigns entirely and the expectation is they will not have revenue. Alternatively, maybe they are just very low volume campaigns that from time to time don't accrue any conversions in the course of a day. If you'd like to prevent those issues from being captured unnecessarily, you can add in some additional columns as well. For instance, maybe you would like the absolute value of clicks to always be greater than 100, ensuring that only relatively high volume campaigns are part of this consideration. Alternatively, you can add in an additional filter for status as being active. The second type of alert are what we call status or QA alerts, and they are designed to keep the account in line with best practices. A very common one that we recommend to our clients can be found under the Groups tab. Here, there are two special columns of interest from our view builder. If you navigate to the Advanced section at the very bottom, there are two items for active keywords per group and active creatives per group. If you pull both of them in, which I have here on the right-hand side, you can then create a filter where active keywords is greater than 0, which is to say that these ad groups do have one or more active keywords at this point in time, but active creatives is equal to 0. This would indicate that although these ad groups should be serving traffic in one form or another, they currently are not, because there are no ads associated with those keywords, and therefore there is no opportunity for them to accrue impressions of any sort. This is obviously an item of concern and would be an ideal situation to immediately go in and either clone ads over from another ad group or generate brand new ad copy for these ad groups. Other popular status alerts include disapproved keywords and creatives, where if you upload something into the account, and especially in the case of Facebook or any other areas where there is a substantial delay in ad review, to be able to come back that next day and immediately have the list of disapproved entities presented to you for either further edits or just a redo via the upload process. As I mentioned earlier, alerts are at their core managed just like other recurring reports in Marin. That is to say, if you click on the Reports link in the upper right-hand corner, and then the Reports Template subtab on the left-hand side, you will be able to see both all other recurring reports as well as any alerts that you have set up so far. Under normal circumstances, we recommend adding an email recipient to your alerts. That way it arrives in your inbox directly instead of simply showing up under the reporting or under the completed reports tab here. Please note that Marin will not send you an alert if there is no data to speak of in that report. The idea is we're not trying to spam your inbox, so if there's only a column header or the contextual data that we provide with every report, but none of the actual campaigns or ad groups or keywords have actually triggered your filters, then we will still generate it. It will still show up under completed reports, but it will not arrive in your inbox. To provide a bit more context on recurring reports in Marin in general, before diving into PDF and web query formatted reports, I will start off by explaining how we can create a recurring report. There are two main methods for doing so. Let me just cancel that filter, so we'll go back to the standard view. The first is to use the grid view at any entity level in Marin. So starting from the Home tab, which provides the highest level overview of this Marin account as a whole. It will aggregate all incoming data sources into a single line item for you to analyze. Then there's the Channels tab, which are individual publisher accounts, followed by campaigns, groups, keywords, creatives, and placements. If you navigate to any of those, and right now I'm on the Campaigns tab, you can, in this grid, pull in as many columns as you would like from our view builder, followed by adding in any filters that would be of interest to you before hitting the Create Report icon in the upper right-hand corner. This is the only way of making a one-time report, but if you switch this radio button over to recurring, it is also how you can start creating recurring reports. We'll give it a name, in this case, example, and we'll click the continue button here. This will take you to this screen, which is the report template builder. The alternate way of creating a report, which will take you to this screen directly, is simply to click on Reports in the upper right-hand corner, then Report Templates here, and then you can click on Create to create a new custom report or use one of our predefined report templates. I'll click back into the example that we were working with. And from here, there are a couple items of interest. On the left-hand side is the highest level kind of contextual and delivery information for this report. You have the report format, CSV, PDF, and web query. You have how often it runs. And you have the option of having the completed report emailed to one or more recipients. On the right-hand side, you have the data in the report itself. This contains both the title up here, as well as, in this scenario, the campaigns report that I pulled in just a few moments ago. If you hover over this area, you'll see these four icons pop up in the upper right-hand corner. If you click on the Edit pencil, it will take you into that report where you can make any additional changes you'd like. These changes are unique to this one report itself and only apply here. And I'll explain why that is in a few moments. So as you may have noticed earlier when I was creating the campaigns report, you could select any number of columns as well as add in any filters before committing to that recurring report. However, those decisions are not set in stone. You can come back here and adjust them more or less to your will. In other words, creating recurring reports is a relatively flexible process in Marin. We don't force you to use exactly the same view that you used when you started in the reporting format. If for some reason your needs change or you decide to view the data in a different manner, you can do so with great flexibility here. On the left-hand side, we have the entity level at which you would like this report run, whether you'd like the data split by day, week, or month, and if you wanted, whether to cap the number of rows in that report at one of the options given. The next section has our view builder in terms of columns. It works just like the normal Marin view builder. You can navigate to any subsection and check off any of these items. And then the filters icon as well. If you need to add new filters, you can simply click on this plus sign. And likewise, if you started this report with one or more active filters, they will show up here, and you can remove them by clicking on that minus button as well. The sort options exist in the next section. In this case, we are sorted by conversion volume in descending order. Please note that these two items interact with the row limit here. So if you're selecting only 10 rows, we would show you only the 10 campaigns with the most conversions in descending order. Finally, at the very bottom, you have date range. This, by default, if you are using the grid view to create a recurring report, locks itself to whatever that setting was at the time the report was created. However, you are free to override that using one of these available options. For comparison date range, this will only really take effect if you are using any comparison columns at all. For instance, the % change in revenue column that we alluded to earlier in the status alert example. I'm sorry, the performance alert example. If you aren't using any comparison columns, then the selection here will have no bearing on the final output of this report. One thing to note is under date, if you are to use a custom date range, any dates in the future will be incorporated as valid input into this report. For example, I've selected here the 1st of January 2013 through the end of December 2013. While we're less than halfway through the year at this point, if you were to save this report, it would continue to update with the entirety of this year's data until we rolled over into 2014. At that point, you would have to come back here and make some adjustments to these variables to continue having this report update. And the reason why I mentioned earlier that the individual report settings only apply to this report is because it is possible to stack reports in Marin. In this case, the shell as a whole is what we would consider the report and contains the delivery settings, as I mentioned earlier. Each of these individual modules is then a subset of that. And if you navigate down to the very bottom of the page, you'll see an Add Component icon where you can insert an additional table. If I click there, it will load the same view that we were looking at just a few moments ago. You can select the entity level, as well as what data you'd like displayed, and which columns and filters you would like along with those. In this case, we'll click Save. And as you'll see here, we now have 2 stacked reports as part of this larger overall report. CSV is by far the most common report we see our clients generate. But there are 2 other report formats that may be of interest, especially for specific audiences or for specific use cases, and they are PDFs and web queries. PDFs output the report as an Adobe PDF file, and the benefit there is a couple-fold. The major one is that it is not editable by end users. As a result, if you're delivering this to either the end client or to another individual that you don't want being able to extract the data directly, you can use a PDF to make that potentially more difficult. In addition, PDFs do allow you to pull in the other 4 components that Marin offers as far as reporting goes, and those are line charts, pie charts, and scatter graphs. Under the standard reporting formats of CSV or web query, all 4 of these will be grayed out, as you can see here. One major caveat for PDF reports is because they are not as expandable as a CSV, you are limited to the amount of data that you can fit onto the page, depending on whether you're using portrait or landscape format. Please be cognizant that you'll only be able to get so many columns into that view before they start being clipped off the page. So the major benefit of being able to pull in these charts is it can provide a nicely packaged, comprehensive, high-level overview of account performance or some subset of account performance that can be framed in such a way that it tells a story about what's happening either over time or at a given point in time across a dimension or a metric of your choice. We'll navigate down to the very bottom of this page to the Add Component section, and I'll walk quickly through the various different charts that are available. The first is the line chart, which is the simplest and most common in use. It simply shows you a series data over a given frame of time, in this case, last 7 days. You can once again select the level in which you'd like it run, any filters that you would like included into this data, and then the metrics that you actually want charted in this view. A common line chart example would be click volume versus conversion volume by month or by week for the past 6 to 12 months. The idea there is we're trying to find those outliers where hopefully there's some room for opportunity, or there's some opportunity for growth, or there's some potential inefficiencies in how spend is currently being run. For instance, any areas with very high click volume but very low conversion rates are potentially due to poor seasonality or other factors, and you may wish to assess more closely. The converse is also true. Any periods of time with low click volume but great conversion rates are areas that that are easily able to be capitalized on to get additional performance for the same cost basis. Then we have pie charts, which simply compare one value across the account, showing you a breakdown of that by an additional metric of choice. In this case, what we're looking at is total incoming click volume split up by campaigns. However, pie charts can be very flexible. You can, let's say, do total incoming revenue split up by geographic region, or total incoming impressions volume split by line of business. Please note that for the last two examples, you will have to use the dimensions feature to get line of business or geographic region tagged in the account. I'll go into more detail about that later on in this presentation. And finally, we have the bubble chart and the scatter graph. These are very similar to each other, except the bubble chart shows you 3 different metrics compared against each other, whereas a scatter graph will only show you 2. So as an example, I'll use this one. And one thing that we often see our clients doing is on the creatives level, we will see conversion rate graphed on the, actually let's make this click-through rate on the y-axis, conversion rate on the x-axis, and then total incoming click volume becomes the size of the bubble. We'll hit Update Preview here to see that data. And as with the line chart, what we're looking for are the outliers. In this case, the upper left-hand corner consists of ads with really great click-through rates, but relatively poor conversion rates. These are areas where we may be overspending and where you may wish to make some additional analysis and adjustments. Likewise, the lower right-hand quadrant consists of ads with relatively poor click-through rates, but really great conversion rates. These are potentially keywords or ad groups where everything matches up very well with the user search intent, where they are actively looking to convert, but for one reason or another, your current ad copy doesn't resonate nearly as well as it could. In other words, these are prime candidates for creative testing or for other ways of attempting to increase total overall volume in the account. And then the final report format that exists in Marin is the web query. And while these have somewhat of a reputation for being unnecessarily complex and elaborate, I can assure you that it's not the case. Depending on your use case, these can be incredibly powerful reports that, although they may take a couple additional steps to set up the first time around, can repay that initial setup fee in terms of greatly improved time savings and streamlined workflow in the future. For a web query, as I showed previously, you will go down and select that format under the type dropdown. And in this case, we would obviously not recommend that it be emailed to any recipients due to how these reports work. At its core, a web query is essentially a CSV report that Marin hosts on a secure server. The benefit of that is, because the report does not arrive in a new Excel file every day or every week, you can add additional information into the master Excel file that builds off of the data you're seeing on the right-hand side. For example, if you have any macros, pivot tables, pivot charts, or other items that you would like built into Excel that work off of your search data and you don't wish to recreate all of that from scratch every time, you can then use the web query report format as the basis for all of that. The web query report will refresh on a regular basis, pull in all of the new data from your account, and then anything else you have built out in Excel will naturally update to accommodate that data. So in this case, we'll go ahead and use the example report that I pulled so far, and we'll hit Run Report here. As you can see in this dashboard, there actually have been a couple additional web queries run previously. They can be recognized by this string here, web query. And then there will be two links. The first is a view link, which will simply show you what the web query looks like. As you can see, it is just a table. And the second is a link that is URL for Excel. If you right-click that and select Copy Link Address, we can then open up Excel to finish the web query creation process. Please note that this demonstration is for Excel on Windows, versions 2007 and on. If you are using Mac OS X, please be aware that there are some additional steps you'll have to take to get this data to integrate cleanly. For that, I recommend you contact your online marketing manager. They'll be able to provide you with the details. In Excel, if you click on the Data tab at the top of the screen, and then we will click on From Web, and then in this address box, we will paste in the URL that we just copied out of Marin. In this case, we'll hit Go, and as I mentioned, it is a secure domain. In other words, you will need a valid Marin username and password in order to access that data. As you can see here, it looks just like what we were looking at previously, the table that pulls up if you click on the View link. One item to note about the credentials process in Excel is that the credentials can be saved to your computer, but they do not follow the workbook itself. In other words, if you create a web query or a series of web queries in a document and you save that and send it to one of your colleagues, they will also need a Marin username and password to access that data. Just because you've saved your username and password doesn't mean that those get passed along with the workbook. As you can see in this view, there are 4 yellow arrows on the left-hand side. These are essentially chunks of the report that Excel has identified and which you can select some or all or none of. At the very top, you have the contextual information, which has the name of the report, the scope of it, the date range, and any filters you may have selected. Below that is the summary row, which shows you all of the rolled up data from the final section, which is the actual table that you requested. Finally, the most upper left-hand yellow arrow is Excel's method of saying select all. If you check this off, it will pull the entirety of the report without having to select any individual subsections. Once you've decided what portions you'd like, you can click on the Import button here, select where you'd like the report to go, and click OK. It will take a few moments to generate that data, but it will come in just like any other CSV file. The benefit of using this type of report, as I mentioned, is that because all of this data arrives in the same format every single time, the location of the data shouldn't change between reports. Unless you go in and readjust the report format to add an additional column or remove columns, it will always start on cell A10, and it will always go over, in this case, to column N, and then down to the bottom. And what this allows you to do is, if you were to build a pivot table, it will always reference the same data range. Likewise, if you want to add additional column for formulas that you may not be able to pull in from Marin, you can do so here on the right-hand side. And of course, any additional items that you build off of this, whether it's as simple as a chart to as elaborate as a custom-built macro, all of that, because your data references remain stable, that can continue to provide you with exactly what you were expecting once it all runs. So I'll go ahead and close out of this. This is just scratching the surface of web queries. If you have a very specific use case or you'd like to discuss in more detail, please don't hesitate to reach out to your client services team at Marin. Moving on, we'll cover dimensions, both as a brief overview of what they are and how they operate within Marin Search Marketer, as well as how they integrate into a number of use cases, both involving advanced reporting, as well as performance analysis and URL building as an edge case. So on a very high level, dimensions in Marin consist of what I'd like to call shells. And in those shells, you can tag your entire search account on any level, publisher account, campaign, ad group, keyword, creative, with one or more labels. And while that sounds somewhat simple in practice, the actual execution of them and how dimensions necessarily interact with the rest of Marin make them an incredibly powerful tool. The overriding benefit is that dimensions essentially allow you to remove the limitations of the classic search account structure when it comes to analysis, optimization, and reporting. While the publishers purely look at your search account in terms of accounts, campaigns, ad groups in those campaigns, and keywords and creatives in those ad groups, by using dimensions, you can do away with that, or you can slice and dice the data in ways that wouldn't be possible otherwise. As I'm sure you can guess, dimensions mesh very well with all the other data features in Marin, specifically reporting. They work together beautifully to provide even more functionality with respect to getting only the subset of data you need in exactly the framing and the format that you need it. And as a final use case for dimensions, they also just allow you to make notes in the account, to tag items so that you can retrieve them easily and quickly later, and to be able to essentially manage the account without having to always remember that ad group ABC is the one that you need to look in to find that specific keyword that you were analyzing or working on last night. One very important feature to note about dimensions is inheritance. What I mean by that is dimensions will, in theory, always flow down to the keyword and creative level. However, you don't necessarily have to always tag them on that level. That would be unnecessarily granular. What will happen is any item in Marin, depending on what you're attempting to report on or look in, will pull its dimension value from its own level, if it exists. Otherwise, it will keep looking up the hierarchy until it finds a tag that it will then proceed to inherit or use. So for instance, if you were to tag one of your publisher accounts as brand, and then you go into that publisher account and you tag the one non-brand campaign in it as non-brand, then the entire publisher account minus that one campaign will also inherit the value of brand. The one non-brand campaign and everything under that, the ad groups, campaigns, and the ad groups, keywords, and creatives, will then only those items inherit the value of non-brand. In other words, it works very similar to kind of a management by exception point of view. You're able to, instead of having to make sure that you tag everything correctly on every single level, you can simply tag the most broad-reaching items on the publisher account or campaign level, and then anything that doesn't necessarily fit into those will then be tagged on a lower level, such as groups or keywords. Any new items that you create and upload into the system will, of course, inherit its value from its umbrella entity as well. So if a publisher account has been tagged, then any new campaigns you create in that will inherit the same tag, and so on and so forth. It is only if you do not tag on the account level and you only, let's say, tag at the very highest level at the campaign, that any new campaigns you create will then be assigned the default dimension value of unassigned. In order to create a dimension, you can start off by going to the admin link in the upper right-hand corner and then clicking on the Dimensions subtab. From here, we'll click on Create. We'll name our dimension. In this case, I believe one already exists for non-brand versus brand, which we'll use as the example moving forward. And then if you have multiple people working in the account, you can provide a description for them to recognize later. And then finally, I'd like to call your attention to the Advanced Settings section at the very bottom of this dialog box. There are two options available. The first is tagging only, and the second is tagging and rollup. Tagging and rollup is probably the most common use case for our dimensions. It gets you all the functionality of tagging only, plus the ability to see the pivot table that we build off of those dimension values in Marin directly. So going back slightly to our previous example of a web query report, if there is a specific pivot example that you're trying to create, while that can be done via web query, it may be easier to just create it as a dimension instead, and that way you can access it and monitor it and work with that data as like and pulling it into Excel. Of course, if your preference is to work directly in Excel, then a series of web queries plus the ability to pivot that data is going to be the preferred method. Please note that dimension refresh time is somewhat variable. The actual tagging portion of dimensions happens more or less instantaneously. If I were to go into this account and tag various campaigns, ad groups, keywords with a number of different dimension values, that will be reflected in the grid view more or less immediately. If I pull that back in, for instance, I'll go to the Panes tab. Under View Builder, there will be a subsection devoted to the available dimensions in the account. And then let's say we'll pull in our example, non-brand versus brand. If you move over to the right, it gets added as its own column in the grid. And from here, you can see that these are tagged as non-branded, and this one is tagged as branded. However, the roll-up data, or the pivot table data, under the Dimensions tab itself will take some time to update. It is not immediate. Generally, it will be correct within about 24 hours after creation. However, if you need it pushed through more quickly than that, please reach out to our support services team or to your online marketing manager. So we'll go quickly to the non-brand versus brand dimension just to, once again, have our example. In this case, there have been a couple different tags used. We do recommend maintaining kind of a stable level of tagging within the account. So you decide on the syntax that you'd like to use and exactly how it's spelled and capitalized, just to make sure that there's some level of consistency when this roll-up does occur. As for the actual act of tagging dimensions, there are a couple ways about this. You can multi-edit directly within the Marin interface grid. To do that, we can click on any of these tabs here, such as groups. You can filter for items of interest. In this case, it's retain my previous filters for that status alert or QA alert of ad groups with active keywords but 0 active creatives. We can go ahead and keep that. In this case, I would check off all of the ad groups. Click on the Edit button. And then here, you will see at the bottom of the available edit options a list of every single dimension that exists in this account. You can select one and then add in the tag value into this field here. Alternatively, you can also tag dimensions via bulk upload. This does have the benefit of being able to allow you to both create a brand new campaign ad group keyword as well as give it a dimension tag at the time of creation, essentially streamlining your overall workflow. To do so, this case will remain on the groups level. If you click into bulk add edit, and as you'll see here in this template, all the way towards the end on the right-hand side, there will be a list of every single dimension that exists already in the account. The one we're using as the example today, non-brand versus brand, is there. If you were to copy this out of Marin as a template, or if you were to export the report via the Groups tab itself, you could also use that as a bulk upload template, and then you would add in your new ad groups or pre-existing ad groups and provide a value for this dimension. Please note that you cannot create a new dimension shell via bulk upload. That dimension has to already have been created via admin dimensions. Otherwise, we will not recognize it as a valid column header, and we will reject the bulk upload. As far as undoing or removing dimension tags, that occurs via the same two processes as well. For MultiEdit, you can click on the level which you tag those dimensions, check off the items that you would like to remove the dimension value for, click on the Edit button, go back to that dimension, and then save it as a blank value. This will wipe the dimension for all ad groups completely, and then they will, if possible, inherit the new dimension value from whatever was tagged on the campaign level. Likewise, via bulk upload, if I were to download that previous view as a report, paste it back in here, and then include this column with blank values all the way down, it will wipe those dimension tags from the ad group level. Please note that because we will accept blanks as valid input for dimensions, please do not include all available dimensions in your bulk upload unless you are planning on using them as part of, unless the end goal is to have them be blank. Otherwise, we will recognize for that upload that all of these exist and yet are blank, and we would essentially strip every single dimension value from those entities. And finally, if due to how inheritance can interact with various parts of the account, you may sometimes just want to run an audit and see what dimension value is being tagged where and how it's actually pulling to the account. An easy way of doing that is going to, in this case, the keywords level, and we can click on any individual keyword here. And what you'll see on the next settings page is a table towards the bottom of the page that lists all dimensions and their current values. It will provide the dimension at every single level from publisher account down to the keyword so that you can essentially see at a glance what is tagged where and why and whether if there is anything overriding that at a lower level. For instance, maybe we had the client account tagged as non-brand, but then the campaign was tagged as brand, but then the ad group was tagged as non-brand, in which case the keyword would inherit this value, non-brand. If for some reason that was incorrect, or you're just trying to figure out why dimension values are not rolling up as you would expect, this is generally the place to start. Please note that this dimensions status table, essentially, exists on every single level. You can click into a group settings tab, a campaign setting tab, and a channel setting tab to see that as well. As far as some common use cases for dimensions, other than the ones I mentioned earlier, some other ones that we've seen clients use very often include just analyzing performance by segmentation that doesn't exist in their account naturally. For instance, brand versus non-brand keywords, product line, line of business, geographic region. These are all items that you can tag as a dimension and then pull into the roll-up to see, let's say how the Northeast is faring versus the West Coast versus the Southeast. Likewise, you can see how, in this case, your various different brands perform relative to each other. And going back to my previous example involving that pie chart, by tagging on any of these levels, you can then pull that into a report in Marin to be able to see data in ways that you may not be able to elsewhere. For instance, maybe I would like to see what all incoming traffic looks like in terms of click volume by your various brands. And so what you'll see here is these brands have the highest overall volume, but may not contribute the most to the account, or at the very least will provide you with a good starting point for further analysis and optimization. An additional use case of dimensions that I'll actually cover at the very end of this webinar is record keeping, or being able to analyze changes in the account as a result of other changes that you've made. Because dimensions exist purely on the Marin side, you can update them as often as you'd like. You can add as much information into dimensions as you'd like. You can have, in theory, as many dimensions and individual tag values per dimension. And so you can keep track of the date that new items were created. You can roll up your ad copy by an overarching language test, or different calls to action or value propositions, or even different promotions that you're running at a given point in time. And then a final advanced use case for dimensions involves our URL builder. You can also pull in tags into URL builders to provide, again, some additional tracking parameters or other URL modules that may not be part of the standard Marin build. I'll cover that briefly at the very end of this presentation, as it is very much an advanced use case, but please bring that up with your client services team at Marin if you would like to discuss in more detail. So as far as using dimensions to measure lift, or in essence being able to show in concrete terms what a change that made within the account led to various repercussions, what you can do is tag those items with the value that you were trying to change. So for this example, we'll say that on the campaigns level, we've just added 2 or 3 of these folders, or these campaigns, to a brand folder and have set them live on Marin bidding. We would like to know how they perform relative to the rest of the account. We would like to know whether automated bidding in this scenario is actually helping or the account or those campaigns as a whole. To do so, we could check these off, click on the Edit button, pull in a dimension value, and then go ahead and save that tag. Our bidding team does this often internally, although we also have clients where we recommend to clients that they monitor this themselves. The idea being that the 3 campaigns here, let's say we had them with yesterday's date, the 16th of April, 2013, the rest of the account, because it is not tagged on that dimension, would show up in the unassigned folder, and for all intents and purposes would be considered the control data set. Then in a couple days or a week, we can come back to that dimension, take a look, and say for the 17th through the 24th, what we are seeing is an increase in conversion volume for those 3 accounts of 10%, whereas the rest of the account has actually been either static or dropped slightly in overall conversion volume week over week. As a result, we can say that the changes here are most likely due to Marin automated bidding, and from there we can decide, whether we would like to push more aggressively in terms of volume, or whether we'd like to try to squeeze out a bit more efficiency in the current structure. The same thing can be done for brand new item creation. For instance, if you upload a brand new campaign or ad groups or keywords, you can tag them with the date of creation, and then come back later and compare those items against the rest of the account as the control. The hope is that your new campaigns or keywords will end up doing just as well, if not better, than the rest of the account. If that's not the case, then you can make a decision as to whether they're worthwhile to preserve in the account. The same can apply to negative keywords, where if you upload a set of negatives to one or more of your campaigns, you can tag those as having had new negatives added on the 17th of April, and then come back at a later date and say that for those campaigns, what we saw was a drop in publisher cost of 15%. However, conversion volume has held more or less steady, so those negatives contributed to essentially a lift of 15% for the affected items, at which point you can most likely be confident in rolling it out across the rest of your campaigns as a whole. An often thing that happens during automated bidding launches here at Marin is clients will often fight for one or more of their high-value keywords to be exempted from bidding because they would either prefer that we not bid it down or have different goals for it overall, or are just looking for a certain level for those keywords, all performance considerations aside. That's what we call bid override. And often, if they would like, we can also tag those keywords as being explicitly on bid override, such that later we can come back and say that your bid override keywords, according to the data that we have available, are either performing very well or very poorly, and based on that, here are some possible recommendations or considerations that you should take into account. Final use case for lift measurement via dimensions is in creative testing or landing page testing. As I mentioned earlier, what you can do is when going through and creating new ads, tag them with a value that represents either the promotion that they're pushing or the call to action that's in the ad copy. And then at the end of the day, you can go to the Dimensions tab, pull up your creative testing dimension, and take a look. From there, you can say, free shipping appears to outperform 10% off across the board. Therefore, that'll be our new evergreen ad copy, and we'll continue to iterate on variations of that. Likewise, if you're doing landing page testing, you can move your URL to the creative level, keep your ad copy the same, but change the landing page, and then tag those on the dimension level to be able to reference them easily later. And from there, you can say, well, it looks like that landing page A performs better than landing page B. Therefore, we'll keep that moving forward, or we'll trade out landing page B for landing page C and continue the testing process. And the idea is by aggregating the entirety of the accounts data into those two line items, you can hopefully get enough information to make a decision on that very quickly without having to go in and either download every single ad as a report, pivot that data and run it yourself, or essentially look at individual ad groups to see which one is performing best. And while we're on the subject, in the previous webinar, there was a question asked regarding A/B testing, which is a separate module built into Marin that performs somewhat the same, but also very different features within the application. The main benefit of using creative testing by dimensions is that it provides you a very high-level view of the account as a whole. How are all of my ads of this variation performing versus all of my ads of a different variation? However, we also offer a automated A/B testing module that you can access by clicking on Admin and then A/B testing. And what happens here is you will select a test metric of interest. And every morning after data has fully loaded, we will then run a comparative analysis among all active ads in a given ad group to see which one is the best performer, or which ones are the best performer. We are specifically looking for a statistically significant difference with a confidence level selected here. And if we find that, we will begin to declare those ads to be either winners or losers accordingly. The main distinction between the dimension-based creative testing and the A/B testing module is that the A/B testing module operates only within the ad group. As a result, you'll always have to make sure you have more than one active creative per group. Otherwise, there will never be anything to compare against, and we'll never declare a winner or a loser. In addition, this does require a certain body of data, which you can see down here under Advanced Settings, and as a result, we don't anticipate that you will see winners and losers declared for every single group across your account. It'll most likely be your highest volume groups that you will have enough data for us to make this statistically significant calculation and provide that to you in the grid. Using the dimension-based creative testing, you can instead see that across all items so that you can make a decision kind of categorically for your account. The one benefit of using the automated module, however, is that you can it will pick out differences on the ad group level between ad groups. So for instance, if ad A performs best in this ad group, but ad B performs best in the other one, this will let you know. Whereas if you rolled it all up into the very highest level dimension, then you would simply say across the board it looks like ad A is better, and you would miss out on the possibility that for a couple of your ad groups, ad B might actually be the top performer. And finally, the other question that was asked in the previous webinar was regarding dimensions and URL Builder, and they had requested that I elaborate a bit on how those two interact. So if you were here for the webinar that occurred in early April, just covering URL Builder, it was briefly mentioned there, but I'm happy to go into a bit more detail. Again, this is very much an advanced feature for clients that have very specific URL building needs. So if that is the case, because it is so closely tailored to each individual situation, I would highly advise you discuss with your client services representative. Marin's URL Builder can be found under Admin, Revenue, and then URL Builder. As you can see at the very bottom of the screen, there is what I like to call the library, and this consists of all URL blocks that Marin has predefined for your account. For instance, and these are always represented by square brackets, so publisher, keyword text, creative ID, so on and so forth. If for some reason you would like to pull in something that doesn't exist here, you can do so by creating it as a dimension. And what would happen there, just to pull a random dimension from our list, let's say brands, is if you go back to URL Builder, you can then add in, let's call B equals, and then you want to pull in the brand name. In this case, it was brands, so we'll use the dimension name in square brackets. What will happen is when we build that keyword level URL, we will look up this value because it doesn't exist as a predefined item. We will see that it is a dimension, and then we will attempt to look up the label for that dimension for that keyword and pull it in here. And a benefit there is, once again, because your dimension tagging is independent of account structure, the way that this can be manipulated and the way that it represents the account can change very quickly and can be essentially a much more flexible way of getting certain data into your URLs that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, or that you would have to do by hand. A very common use case is with one of our call tracking providers. They provide what they consider to be campaign IDs. However, those don't necessarily map cleanly to campaigns in the client search structure. As a result, you may have 3 campaigns that have one campaign ID and then another 5 campaigns that have a different campaign ID. Previously, you would have to tag those by hand, and you would have to remember which campaigns represented which. But instead, you could just create a new dimension, call it campaign ID, and then tag your individual campaigns with what that ID should be, and then add that into URL Builder. And then when we build that out, we will pull it in, and you are good to go. So as I mentioned, if you have any additional questions about this, or you want to discuss your particular scenario with your client services representative at Marin, please don't hesitate to reach out to them. I believe my contact information will be sent out as part of the follow-up for this presentation as well. So if you have any additional questions or concerns about any of the content that we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, thank you all very much for your time, and have a great day.